And then all these there was no list that we know of, but there were names. I think there was 170 and 90 of them have come transparent. We had Bruce Willis, Leonard DiCaprio, Alan Dershowitz, the former George.
Truth Decryptor dives into explosive revelations from Trump's tangled Epstein connections, rising fascist rhetoric among his supporters, and controversial immigration policies ripping America apart. From Hollywood names and scandal to shockingly open extremist views, alongside heated historical debates, this segment unpacks the biggest controversies shaking U.S. politics today.
Mitchell, the former Democratic majority leader, but it doesn't mean that they did anything wrong. They come across in these indictments, these interrogatories of all these two criminal proceedings that they either wanted money from Jeffrey Epstein, or he solicited them for influence, or they talked to him, or they texted him, or they visited him. But we don't know of all those names how many people actually engaged in these horrendous activities. So I think what happened when they started to see that Donald Trump was going to release them, a lot of people put pressure and said, wait a minute, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. And if you release my name, and I think that team gave into that pressure. I think at this point, it would be very wise to let the chips fall where they are, release it, and each person should try to explain why they were there if they need to do that. But it's only going to get worse if they suppress it. And they had the Wall Street letter that Donald Trump wrote. That was kind of ridiculous. I don't think Donald Trump usually writes typewritten interrogatories to people. He may or not. He says he didn't. The illustration. But at this point, after E. Jean Carroll and Stormy Daniels, that's all baked into the Trump phenomenon. And the idea that he wrote a risque note is of no value, I think. I don't understand the sensationalism about it.
Yeah, and I don't quite understand why he's so angry about it, because all that does, I think, is draw more attention. But I don't really understand the strategy of all of this, because, I had Alina Haber on from the Trump administration about 3 months ago, and she was absolutely walking everybody up the hill to believe that these Epstein files were sensational, that they included a lot of names that were going to be released, and it was going to be really shocking, and that we finally get accountability. Because, of course, there is this perverse reality that because Epstein took his life, or as some people believe, maybe something more nefarious, but because he died before he could face proper justice, that the only person who's been made accountable for everything that went on is Ghislaine Maxwell, a woman. Interestingly, I had her brother on, Ian Maxwell, who said this. Let me just play the clip.
She's entitled.
Here we confront the harsh reality linking Trump's top aide, Stephen Miller, to white nationalist extremism, raising serious questions about the administration's immigration agenda and the racial motivations behind it.
Bring new evidence that was not available at her trial, showing government misconduct prior to the trial, in the trial, and post the trial, including, for example, the now, as far as we're concerned, confirmed perjury of one particular juror who perjured himself in front of the judge at the hearing brought at her request as to why he did not disclose his prior sexual abuse on the jury selection form. So all of this is to say that Ghislaine didn't have a fair trial. That's the bottom line.
Now, what is interesting about the whole interview he gave is that my feeling is that she is going to give some kind of deposition. Maybe she'll appear in front of Congress. I'm not entirely sure what she's going to be revealing, because his position as her brother, who's talked to her throughout all this, is that she did nothing criminal and had no knowledge of him doing anything criminal. So it's hard to see if what they're hoping for is that she gets some kind of immunity in return for information. Then either she does a complete 180 and starts spewing out all sorts of stuff in return for immunity, or it really doesn't really take things any further.
Yeah, I think what they're expecting, I think that all of us, what we would like to hear is some kind of categorization of these people that came in and out of their world. In other words, she said, this was a CEO, this was a major politician, we had an office at Harvard, and these names are in that category, and these people are in this category, and there were some people that went down to the Caribbean, or they were on the so-called Lolita Express. without maybe incriminating herself or incriminating them, but just give us some idea, because right now the public perception is that anybody who turns up in any way, shape, or form next to Jeffrey Epstein is a pedophile. And that's not true. It's absolutely not true. They had bad judgment, or they were unduly impressed by his wheelie dealing and his apparent wealth, or young women are on his arm, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily criminals. So she could be of value trying to explain how people that we would never think should be turning up on various government documents or his own private communications had anything to do with it.
I mean, the problem, it seems to me, in terms of optics, is that everyone in the Trump administration was taking everybody up this hill, like I said, right to the point Elon Musk fell out with Trump and then tweeted or posted on his X platform, you know, the biggest bombshell is that Trump's in the Epstein files. And then within like 2-3 weeks, everything on the Epstein files is shut down. And all that has done is fuel just massive conspiracy theories about what did Elon Musk see in these files, how is Donald Trump potentially compromised, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, like you do, I mean, my gut feeling is Trump has done nothing criminal here whatsoever in relation to Epstein, but he was quite a friend of his for quite a while. That is uncontestable. You know, there was a report, I think CNN last night said that Epstein attended Trump's 1993 wedding to Marla Maples. But again, that doesn't shock or do anything to me. It's like, well, they were friends. You know, I'm sure Trump had all sorts of people there that probably, with hindsight, might look a bit dodgy. But it doesn't mean Trump did anything wrong in relation to them. So I just feel like they've created a much bigger problem with the way they've handled this.
They did, and there's a sin of commission and omission, because his brand was transparency, and they hyped it up in a way that would be spectacular, and that was impossible to fulfill.
This critique highlights how Trump's team mishandled the Epstein files release, turning potential accountability into conspiracy fuel and alienating even his base with secrecy and suppression instead of clarity.
I think because a lot of people pressured them and said they were innocent and they were going to be guilty by association, and they backed off. But they could have said that. The second thing is, he was having a spectacular run the last 90 days. The border is shut down. We have, all of a sudden, we have 55,000 more recruits. There is no recruiting shortage. All of the Wall Street Journal news alarm that we're going to be in recession, stagflation, trade wars, that all didn't turn out to be true. The economy is sound. He's really taken on a lot of the corruption. Where I work in higher education, the DEI is pretty much dead in the United States, at least publicly. It's now subterranean. So he had a lot of spectacular successes, and yet this should have been in the time that he was explaining them and enjoying the fruits of his labor. And instead, he got angry, and he should have, you know, when he said he attacked his supporters, he said that they were in collusion with the left. That took away from his very good record. And I think they need now just to be as transparent as they possibly can.
Yeah, I totally agree. Victor, I just want to end by asking about Israel. You've been very pro-Israel as a defender of Western values. But you said recently, we're at an historic time in the Middle East. Never in our lifetime have we been closer to a complete revolutionary fervor that gives promise of normalcy for the Middle East, and never have we been in more danger of seeing the entire region blow up. How do you feel today?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I think Israel and Donald Trump exposed to the world the mirage of Iran. We were told that this theocratic Iran and its goose-stepping Hezbollah were indomitable. And yet when you looked at the evidence, Hezbollah really had not won a war. Their forte was killing innocent people in Beirut or in the barracks. And Iran had never won a war in 50 years. They'd lost basically stalemate with Iraq that had about 40% of its population. So suddenly there is no Iranian Air Force, there's no Iranian Navy, there's no Iranian air defenses, there's no nuclear program. Hezbollah is not only, its hierarchy has been killed, but they're identifiable now. Everybody who has maimed injury, everybody knows who they were all the time. Hamas, I think, will be eliminated. The Houthis are kind of corralled, and it's a surreal situation where Donald Trump goes in there for 30 minutes. He has to ask the Israelis permission to go into Iranian airspace. he comes back out. He declares a ceasefire. Any other Republican would have retaliated to that performance art missile attack to save face by the Iranians when they hit our base in Qatar. Donald Trump says they had to get out of their system, make Iran great again. So it was really bizarre, but it confused the enemy. And now I think with the Middle East and the idea that Israel has this power and that it's really privately the Middle East so-called, if that term is accurate, the moderate states that think that Israel has done more for it by defanging Hezbollah and defanging Hamas and defanging Iran than they could themselves. They will never admit that. But I think there's a chance that there's going to be a de facto peace and maybe 5 or 6 more countries in the Abraham Accord. It all depends, though, on Iran and the future of Iran, and that depends on the administration that's in power in Washington or Netanyahu. Everybody's been arguing here, I think quite stupidly, about the actual degree of damage. Is it damage forever, or 10 years, 5 years, the nuclear capabilities of Iran? But it all depends on what a future American president would do. We've learned now that you could have stopped that at any time you wanted. They had no ability to prevent you from doing so. It was just a matter of high-risk geostrategy vis-a-vis China, Russia, etc. But Iran is now entirely at the mercy of the Israelis and the United States government, for a while at least, and they've lost face. And if they continue the pressure, I'm not sure that you won't. I don't think the Iranian people, after what happened in 2009, will rise up again, but the military, the second echelon, knows that they are on a target list and their superior commanders have been killed. They've been humiliated in the public eye and by the theocracy. And you could have some movement in the military against this theocracy if the pressure continued.
The one big problem, it seems to me, for Israel in terms of global support is Gaza and what is going on there now. You know, I've got to be honest, I've moved from a position of defending Israel pretty vociferously in the few months after the appalling attacks of October the 7th to now finding a lot of what they're doing in Gaza indefensible. You know, the starving of people, the constant slaughter of civilians, particularly children, and the failure to achieve the original goals and the apparent new goal, as articulated by people like Smotrich on the far right of the government, that they want to cleanse Gaza of all Palestinians. I mean, are you concerned that there seems to be no obvious plan here, and that in the process of prosecuting the war that they're doing, in the way that they're doing it, the Israeli government is turning Israel into more and more of a global pariah, particularly amongst its friends, who have all been issuing statements condemning what they're doing, and that also perhaps making the lives of Israelis and Jews around the world less safe as a consequence.
Well, it is true. I think everybody realizes, I think some people in Israel realize it, and maybe even the government, that there's only one solution to Gaza, and that is the Palestinian people will be in Gaza. It's their territory. But Hamas is a terrorist organization, and if they come back, they will not only oppress their people again. They had one election one time, and then they hijacked that government in 2005-06. Israel pulled out. They left $50 million in infrastructure, and they destroyed everything. And so they pulled out all the settlers, and they said, it's all yours now. And we know what followed. But so I don't think that the idea of a Hamas in Gaza is compatible to the United States or Israel.
No, I agree.
Even so that they're going to.
The discussion exposes a troubling rise in anti-Semitism across political lines, intensified by the Gaza conflict and wider Middle East tensions, deepening divisions and threatening social cohesion.
So the solution is, how do you rebuild that by getting rid of Hamas and not letting Hamas terrorize the people? I know, but nobody's found a solution. I will say here in the United States, on campuses, when I see people protesting, and by the way, most of the protests started after October 7th, but before October 23rd or 4th, when Israel went into Gaza, there's an asymmetry that no one really explains. I mean, There's 1 million people in labor camps in China, Rwanda, and the Congo. It was one of the most bloody wars in the world. Turkey is illegally occupying Cyprus, still illegitimately, illegally, much more dramatically than even Gaza. The Kurds have been pretty much attacked. Armenia just was ethnically cleansed of 200,000 people by the Turkish forces. No one says a word. So as a historian, I always ask myself, why is everybody talking about this? And they should talk about, but they're not talking about what happened to Armenia. They're not talking about what happened to the Kurds. They're not talking about occupied Cyprus. They're not talking about any of this. And I don't know, I don't have an explanation other than Israel is very successful and Western, and people think that it's an easy target. It listens to its critics. It's a democracy. Or there's a lot of, I have been surprised how much anti-Semitism, and not just, I knew it was on the left, but it's also starting to emerge in the right-wing base. And that I hadn't seen that since the 1950s in the United States. So it's very worrisome. And I don't think it's just in response to what Israel's doing. I think there was a deep-seated anti-Semitism that
this
the
explosive
Israeli
segment
Gaza
carves
thing
deep
gives
into the
people
Trump
a
saga,
legitimate
revealing the
platform.
murky Epstein connections tangled with celebrity names, the unsettling rise of openly fascist Trump supporters, and a harsh immigration crackdown fueled by racial ideology. It also spotlights the mishandled Epstein files scandal and a worrying surge of anti-Semitism amid Middle East crises. For truth seekers, it's a must-watch to understand the currents reshaping America's political and social fabric. Subscribe for our fearless, unfiltered analysis every week.